Welcome to the Birds and the Bees podcast. This is Braxton Dutson.
That's the key. People aren't talking about it.
Everybody needs to know that porn is not a documentary.
It's not like if we don't talk to kids about sex and sexuality, they're not going to hear about it. They're just not going to hear about it from us.
They have tons of questions, they just don't know how to ask them.
All you have to do is be one chapter ahead. You don't have to know everything. Just one chapter ahead of wherever your child is.
So I caught up with Dr. Tina Schermer Sellers. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist and certified sex therapist through ASECT. She's also an associate professor of the marriage and family therapy program at Seattle Pacific University. She's also the director of their medical family therapy program and the director of the Northwest Institute on Intimacy. Thanks so much for joining us, Tina.
Thanks so much for having me.
That's a lot of things for you to be doing. You're two directors as well as an associate professor as well as doing therapy. How do you throw that all in?
Sometimes not very easily.
I can't imagine.
But sometimes I manage to. Yeah, it's difficult sometimes. But, I get my hands in lots of pots, I think.
Well, I'm really glad that you've taken time out to be on the Birds and Bees podcast with me today.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
So we have you coming up into, well, not coming up, I guess coming down to Utah. We've got September 23rd is when I have you down for being at the Rocky Mountain Sex Summit. Is that right?
That's right. Yes, I'm really excited about that.
Oh, me too. I think it is going to be wonderful. What is the topic that you plan on talking about, or what are you bringing to the Sex Summit this year?
Well, I'm going to be talking about the impact of sexual shame on our lives and how to free ourselves from it so that we can live fully into the gift of our sexuality. And if we're practitioners, how to help our clients live fully into their gift of sexuality, because I don't think we do that very well in America. So that's what I'm going to be exploring with people. Yeah.
Wonderful. So you've got a lot of different ways that you've been trying to approach this subject. You've got a blog, you've got the Northwest Institute on Intimacy, as well as a book that you just came out with. Is that right?
That's right. Yes. I'm kind of hitting it from lots of angles.
Yeah, you are. Why a book about God, sex, and the conservative church?
That is such a good question. I think I would probably ask myself that question, like, are you really going to do this?
That's heavy.
Yeah, right. I would not recommend people to do that. Do not take on the church. That is not a smart thing to do. But it really happened very organically and very much out of my heart. And my career very much was in medicine and working with the psychosocial impact of chronic illnesses on people's lives and training physicians on the psychosocial impact of illness on people and how to be better physicians around that. And so it was sort of in a kind of a different place, but I had been teaching the human sexuality course in our program for, since the early 1990s.
Mm-hmm. And is this at Seattle Pacific, or is this Northwest Institute?
This is at Seattle Pacific University in the marriage and family therapy program. And then one of the things that I have my students do, and we actually do this in many of our courses, is I have them write an aspect of their story. So in many of the classes, like if you're teaching a family of origin class, you have them maybe write an aspect of their family of origin story. Mm-hmm. Or I teach a psychopharmacology and medical issues class. So in that class, they write their illness story. Well, in the human sexuality class, they write their sexual autobiography. And that's one of many assignments. But the purpose of all of the story writing that they do is so that it's person of the therapist work. It's so that they understand where they begin and end, and their clients begin and end. And the sexual story, anybody's sexual autobiography, their sexual story, is a very important story to know, because most of us, if we grew up in a home that was silent or silent and shaming, our story, quote unquote, lives in these very isolated experiences. Like, I remember getting in trouble for touching my cousin when I was 6. And I remember my first kiss. And I remember, and these isolated incidences, right? And so it's not really a cohesive narrative until you're asked to write it down or to think of it through its entirety.
Oh.
And so I give the students like 60 questions, and I have them go back 3 generations, and I think about, like affection, how affection and gender and experience happen. Yeah, so
Covers
it's
the
very
gamut.
comprehensive. Yeah, it's a very comprehensive process, and it's sometimes one of the most difficult stories that they write. And they'll tell me that, like, this was the hardest paper for me, but it was the most important paper for me. And so I've read well over 500 of these in my career. Well, right about the year 2000, I began to notice a significant shift in the tone and content of the stories of students of mine from conservative religious backgrounds. And probably half of my students might come from that background. And I couldn't figure out why I was seeing this shift. Like, they were just describing so much more like body shame and disgust and ignorance about their body and sexuality.
Really?
And, so much more. And I thought, well, what's happening here? And then it showed up the next year and the next year. And I would go into my chair's office and literally weep. Like, I just didn't know why I was seeing so much, like, self-condemnation and other condemnation. And yet they were like, they weren't doing anything different. Like, they would just have crushes on people, or they would just be dating somebody, or they would kiss somebody, or maybe they would have sex. But these were like very normative, right, experiences. But the way they felt about themselves or felt about others was just horrific. And I thought, what is going on? So finally, I started asking questions. And what I realized is I was getting the first wave of kids that had come through what we later called the purity movement. And this actually grew out of the merger of the religious right and the moral majority, which kind of happened through the 80s, which was a socio-political movement. But then that not culminated, but what grew out, one of the things that grew out of that was this thing called the True Love Weight program out of the South, out of sort of the Southern Baptist convention, and there was a program that came out of that, and there were these pledge cards and purity rings,
the purity rings.
And there were well over 4 million kids in the first 3 years that signed these purity cards, and it wasn't just don't have sex before marriage, but it was
no masturbation.
Well, yeah, kind of. I don't even think they never became that.
They didn't go that.
Wasn't that?
Okay.
Well, they didn't make it that explicit. What they would say is be pure in body, mind, heart, and spirit. And so the body was, don't have sex before marriage. And then sometimes they would go so far as say, don't masturbate because you're not going to be able to control your thoughts. And you want your thoughts to be pure. And you want your desires to be pure. So don't desire sex. Don't desire connection and pleasure. Okay. Well, when you start telling a 10 and 11 and 12-year-old that's one thing. But when they start having hormones and they start feeling and their development begins to grow, right, and they start actually feeling these things, then they start to naturally feel and desire and want, and then they start thinking, I've got to be able to stop this. I can't stop this. I want to stop this. And they get themselves in this feedback loop that is, something's wrong with me. I'm horrible. I must be perverted. I should be able to stop this. What's wrong with me? I'm bad.
Oh, wow.
And this is going on and on inside of them. And then, of course, they can't because it's like stopping yourself from breathing. But they keep thinking they should be able to. And this is not just not acting. This is also not thinking and feeling. So this is going on. Now, then what is added on top of this is a lot of these kids were going to rallies and they were going to youth groups where really, I don't want to describe, dramatic kind of like displays were happening where they would be sitting in a circle and the youth director would say, see this big lollipop, this big sucker. I want you to pass it around while everybody take a bite out of it as I'm talking to you. And so they would do that, and he would be or she would be talking about how we want to remain pure and why we want to remain pure and why, God wants you to be able to present a pure person to your partner someday, and how you just don't want to be giving any of yourself away because when you do, you can't get it back, and yada, yada. And then as this sucker is going around, this lollipop is going around, but then at the end, what they hold up is this stick. And then they would say, see, because this is all there'll be left of you if you've been giving yourself away. Or they would pass around a cup and they'd ask people to spit in the cup. Or they'd pass around a flower and they would ask them to pull a petal off the flower. Or they would hold up a piece of foil that was completely, uncreased. And they'd say, this is you. This is what you're like now. But if you start to have feelings for somebody else and then somebody else and then somebody else, and then they crumble it up, then you try to, give yourself away someday, and you're not going to be able to ever go back. So they do these very dramatic,
the chewed up piece of gum,
sensory.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Two different colored pieces of paper glued together, then they rip them apart. Just very dramatic things that these kids, what they locked in their heads was, I will become damaged goods, and no one will want me. God won't want me, and no one else will want me.
Yeah.
And then what got added to that is women were made responsible for what men felt. So if a guy came on to her, she was basically told, what are you wearing? You shouldn't be wearing that. Guys can't help themselves, but you, girls, you should be able to keep them from feeling that. By how you look at them, by,
That's heavy responsibility.
Right. And so girls so much felt like, I have got to keep myself, protect myself, and keep guys. And so they were shutting themselves down even more. So you can imagine what this does if you've been doing this for 10 or 15 years before you partner.
Yeah. And then you start getting these... what you're saying, the purity wave coming through, and then they start to get married. So those who have been pushing this off or feeling they're worthless, then they're getting married and having a wedding night with all the shoulds, and they're not talking about it. I imagine that just brings on so many problems.
So many problems. So people say, well, can you flip a switch? There's no switch to be flipped at all. Sometimes people, they might want to be able to turn themselves on, but they can't. Literally, they have hardwired their brain and their body to say no. So I was seeing cases of vaginismus I had never seen in my career except for in sexual trauma.
Wow. And
I was now seeing them in 25-year-olds who had not experienced sexual trauma except for this.
Wow.
And almost all the out-of-control sexual behavior cases I was seeing in men and in women were from sexual shame, was from this sexual shame.
From the don't, and the continued learned behavior of, I can't do this, sex is all bad, it's all bad. And then it becomes okay, but you've been pushing for years from age 12 to when you are ready to have sex, but you've become this shame machine of everything sexual is bad, and this is bad.
Right, and I'm bad, and therefore everything that I do underground is bad too, and it reinforces my badness, right? So all my sexuality is in the dark. Every bit of it is in the dark.
Wow.
That's the only place it grows. And so now I don't know how to bring it into the light. I have no experience of it in the light, and I have no education about what it would even look like in the light. Nothing at all. And my partner's often scared to death. And not only that, but, most people, men and women, are getting their quote-unquote education from media and from pornography. And most of it from heterosexual pornography, which is worse than gay pornography.
Interesting.
Because there's so much more humiliation and violence in heterosexual pornography, generally speaking.
Okay.
Unless you're watching ethical porn. But generally speaking, there's more humiliation and violence in heterosexual porn than in gay porn. Because of that, there's this power differential thing going on. There's just more things around humiliating women in heterosexual porn. You just don't see that in gay porn. There's not humiliation going on in gay porn. And so guys get confused and girls get confused about how am I supposed to be treated. Guys are confused about how am I supposed to treat women. It's just confusing. It's like, well, if nobody's teaching me about what sex is supposed to be, how am I supposed to figure this out?
Wow. Yeah. Wow, that is heavy. How do you figure that out, especially all the way across the board if you've been taught that everything's wrong and bad? And is there a way for someone to desire to be abstinent until they're married, but then also not run into this shame loop that we're talking about? Like, is that possible to do?
Oh, absolutely. It's absolutely possible. I mean, I'm all about how to help families do that. Like this fall, in fact, through the Institute, we run couples intimacy retreats. It's one of our favorite things to do. And we've been doing it for about 7 years. And this fall, I had a couple of moms call me who are a part of three streets of people that all live together, and they're all kind of or live near each other, and they're all raising their kids near each other. These are families, and a couple of them called me and said, so our kids are getting close to pre-adolescence and we're getting freaked out. Can you help us? And I said, of course I'll help you. You know how I love you guys, So 10 couples are coming. They're I don't know, renting a house, or they have a big enough house or whatever, but they're all getting together, and we're getting together for 6 different Monday nights. And I've put together a whole curriculum to take them through how to raise their kids from 10 to 20 years old. And but there's absolutely ways to do this. And one of the things that you do is you provide what I call 100 one-minute conversations. Basically what that means is you provide age-appropriate sex education, sex and gender and relationship education to your child as they grow up. So what that means is every parent needs to know what is the developmental task of my child at each age. Now, you can find that out by getting books like Growing Up Again by Clark and Dawson. That's a basic developmental book, and it'll tell you what are the tasks at every age. And then so you figure out what those tasks are, and then you go by Robbie Harris's books. She's got about 4 books on sexuality, and you buy the ones, the ones from like 2 to 4, and then 5 to 7, and then 8 to 10 or whatever.
Nice.
And you just know what are the tasks of my child, and then you make sure that you're having those conversations about sexual development and relational development all around those ages all the time. You just listen for what's happening in their relationships, and you listen to what's happening on TV, and you are constantly just talking about it as it comes up, and you make it a normal part of life, like brushing your teeth, and what are we going to eat for breakfast, and yep, and look at that, and look how they were talking to each other. Now, what do you think about that? And they find their penis, and they think it's the most wonderful thing, and you're like, yes, don't we have a wonderful God to give you a part of your body that helps you feel good? And we touch our penises in our room. Mommy does it, Daddy does it, and you're going to do it too. We just, we do it, and we always do it with a super excited, happy face on, and not with a, oh my God, face on.
Because the freak out.
That's how we do it.
Is a teaching. Yeah. It's overtly teaching. Right.
Yeah, so we do it with I am really grateful for this part of my life face on, like a happy face on, And sometimes we have to practice this because our own shame gets in the way, and we have to heal our own shame first. So if we were raised with shame, we have to rewire our brain. So we have to practice. We have to practice in the front of the mirror. We have to practice with our partner. We have to kind of anticipate what's going to happen, anticipate it, and practice so that our responses are a little bit more relaxed, But that's what we try to do. We try to anticipate, and we want to be able to have ongoing 101-minute conversations as our kids grow up. What research shows is if you have ongoing open conversations with your kids as they grow up, they will get involved with sex later. They will make safer sexual choices. As adults, they will describe themselves as having a more satisfying sexual relationship that's more varied. And my favorite part of the research says they will describe themselves as closer to their parents overall.
Whoa, it builds the attachment relationship within the parent and child.
Exactly.
Just by
because
talking,
yes.
Just by talking about sex.
Just by talking about sexuality and relationships, because they trust their parent to be able to handle it.
Wow.
It's a really important conversation. So of all the conversations you want to do, this is the one you want to get good at.
Yeah. This is kind of what I had Alicia Worthington on the show just a couple episodes back. We were talking about how you do have to practice. You do have to have these conversations, be able to say penis, vagina with a smile on and not a freak out, even though inside you might be freaking out. But I did not know that it could really bring you that much closer, and it shows that even that much more that you can have these healthy, safe, non-shaming conversations, even in religion.
Right. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And so there's lots of reasons why you want to do this, and so we know that just by having the conversations, they're likely to delay onset because it's not going to be a big deal to them. I tell a story in the book about a girl who grew up with a mom who just laid in bed with her lots of nights, and as she was going to bed, and she could ask her mom anything, and it was really how she got extra time with her mom, because otherwise she had to share her mom with her other two sisters. Oh. And so she asked her mom all kinds of questions, but she said what it did was it just meant that she just wasn't interested because boys just didn't seem that interesting to her, because her mom helped her really raise the bar on what she wanted from her own life. And one of the things I have in the book is called the Vow of Onah, which was one of the sex-positive stories I found when I did my study into ancient Hebrew writing. And it talks about how to help our girls see themselves as beloved, really to expect to be treated as extra important to if you're in relationship with someone else, that they should be putting you first.
Wow.
But not you putting them first. And the actual vow is that sex is a woman's right and not a man's, and that he should be studying her, and she should experience pleasure and joy every time they have intimate touch. That's the vow. That's the one guideline. There's about 8 of them, but that's one of them. And if you raise your daughter to know that, then she has a completely different marker that she is looking at about how she expects to be treated, and she is given permission to know her own pleasure and to know her own importance. That's very anti-Western.
Mm-hmm. Where can they find the vow, the 8 vows?
The vow, you can find the Vow of Onah in my book. You can find it on my blog as well. You can type in Vow of Onah or Hebrew guidelines, or you can find it in a couple different places.
Oh wow!
It's amazing. Truly, it's amazing. Also, but if you raise your boys with that one idea, then boys, rather than putting themselves first, they learn to put an other first. And what makes that really wonderful is, rather than having to wait in midlife to realize that what grounds all of the hard work he's been doing in his life is his relationships, which is what men usually realize at about 45, that what made all that hard work worthwhile is his relationships to his kids and his partner. He gets to learn that so much earlier in life because he's been raised to pay attention to other. and how important that other is to him.
Wow.
He's been learning that growing up. So now there's a chance that in a heterosexual relationship, they could actually be having much more intimacy, much better sex, maybe even in their 30s, than having to wait until they're 45 or 50.
And on top of that, it sounds like this isn't just relationship, husband, wife, or partner. It's with children as well. That they're not learning, my gosh, it's for others. It's like, oh, now my kids are 20 because I'm 45 or what it may be.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. So there's so much wisdom that I found when I was doing my research for this book around, well, how did the church become sex negative? Was it ever sex positive? Well, it wasn't in Christian history. It really was never sex positive. But if you go back into Jewish history, there are some amazing stories that were very sex positive. And I really believe that we, obviously with the bodies that we have, we're obviously meant to appreciate sexuality and sexual intimacy. And those stories are just back in Hebrew writing. And they are amazing. And you can see that we have this just relentless God that wants you to know that this is a great thing. This is a great gift, and I want you to actually know how beloved you are and how wonderful this gift is and how it should really affirm your life,
Nice.
And we just don't have that message in very many places, I don't think.
No, the messages like that, not so much. The messages that I see and that I keep hearing from clients I work with is, I'm not enough, I'm not big enough, I'm not round enough, I'm not curvy enough, I'm not, versus, look how wonderful. Yeah, the I'm not narrative.
Exactly.
So this is a way to help with children growing up. That is so amazing. What do we do? Let's say we've got a teenager or a parent that is like, oh man, this has been the narrative for my 18-year-old son or my 18-year-old daughter that I've been teaching or that they've been learning, and they're 18, 20 now, they're getting into serious dating, and how can we start to change that? Because if they get into that state of getting married, remaining abstinent, and they find themselves on the wedding night and experiencing one of many different experiences where they've got erectile issues, trying to understand what their meaning of virginity was, what expectations they had versus what desire discrepancy there is, or even feeling forced that it's like, well, it's our wedding night, we have to have sex, and re-traumatizing. How can we retrain, I guess, or change the narrative?
Sure. I love that question. I think that is such an important question, and I see that across all conservative religions, really, that I work with that are around this idea of don't, and I haven't really provided any actual information. Mm-hmm. So this is where the model that I developed, that I call frame, name, claim, and aim comes in. And it's not, I talk about it, it sounds linear. It's not linear. It's really like a circle. You're kind of going to do it and redo it and kind of do it over and over and then round and in circles and that kind of thing. But what the different areas stand for, the different tasks stand for, are frame is provide yourself with a frame or a scaffolding of sex education. So what that does is that helps clear out all the assumptions and mythology that you've picked up along the way that has not been true, and fill it in with the truth about your body and how magnificent it is and how it functions and how it works and why it works the way it does. And it gives you a sense of confidence and understanding and compassion and just so much that you actually really need. It also gives you the language that you've never had about how to actually be able to speak about yourself and your body and someone else's body. And so it's the very beginning of what you need. It's like learning a second language and an understanding. So that's a place where you begin. And I give all kinds of resources on both there's a thankgodforsex.org site, there's the NWIOI.com site, and then there's TinaSchermerSellers.com site. All of those sites have resource pages where I give all kinds of recommendations on sex ed type books to get. The name is tell your story. One of the things that's been so great, I think, about Brene Brown's work in shame is she talks a lot about how shame can't thrive, can't live, can't grow when we start moving it out of the shadows, out of the secret, and into the light, into a place where it is heard, our story is heard in compassion and in empathy and in love. And whether you start that with a therapist or whether you have a friend or two where you can share together what your story is, what has it been like to grow up in a don't environment or in a silent environment or a shaming environment, and hear each other. And one of the great tools that my book provides is you can read it. You can do it like a book group and just read the book and talk together with people about what are you hearing, what do you see, give a week where everybody tells their story, and just let it spill out and just hold each other in that and be like, oh, I hear you, and wow, that just sounds so hard, and
Wow.
because shame can't live when it's exposed to the light and in love. And, man, the whole reason we started the Thank God for Sex project is because people weren't telling their sexual stories. And people were suffering so much in silence. And yet what I was hearing was people were having very normative experiences, but they were feeling so horrible about them, right? And I wanted them to at least be able to go to some place and click on a video at least and be able to hear somebody else's story and go, oh, okay, I'm not so bad and so awful, right?
Uh-huh.
So that's what name is. Claim your body. And, when you live in a consumer-based culture like ours where we sell bodies, that's how we run our economy, is we sell bodies and we don't pay attention to the impact on people and relationships. And that's never going to change as far as I can tell.
Mm-hmm.
We have got to work hard to say, this body that I have, it is a wonderful, important, blessed vessel. And I get to write the poetry of my life through it. I get to love with it. And I am not going to wait until I get on my deathbed to be grateful for it. And the fact that it doesn't look like my neighbor's is supposed to be that way. It is meant to be that way. And I am going to learn to be grateful for it. And if I have to hang out at a playground every single day and watch 4-year-olds celebrate their bodies until I can learn to do the same thing, I am going to do that. It's like we have got to work so hard as men and women to claim our bodies back, but that's what we must do. Like, that's a really important piece of it. And so when you do frame, name, and claim, and you just keep working it really hard with a community of people or a therapist or whatever, what you begin to do is you become conscious of the fact that the aim part is you are aiming to write a brand new sexual legacy, that you are not going to pass down the old legacy anymore, that it is going to stop with you, and that you are going to pass down a new sex-positive legacy to whatever next generation you are going to influence, whether there are children in your life, whether you have nieces, nephews, just community members, but you are going to change the legacy. And the cool thing about sexuality is we can change the legacy in one generation. I've watched it happen.
Really?
And it's amazing. And when you grow up kids with a open conversation where they feel loved and valued and beloved and they are not shamed, it's like they just are so much different. They're so liberated,
Mm-hmm.
And part of why I ended up doing all of this, I think why it struck me at such a visceral level when I saw the pain of my students, is that I grew up in a Swedish American immigrant home that was open and loving, and talking about sexuality and bodies was very integrated in my home growing up. And it was just normal. It wasn't better or worse. It wasn't more important or less important. And people had bodies. It didn't matter what kind they were in. And you talked about it like you talked about spaghetti and what you were eating for dinner and where you were playing or whatever. I mean, it just was a normal part. And I didn't just talk to my mother. I talked to my mother and my father, my grandfather and my grandmother, all of my aunts and uncles. I listened to them talk to each other. It was just a part of our life.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know that every family wasn't like mine until I was well into my 30s. And I just thought every family was like this.
What a surprise.
And I can tell you it's a very, very different way to grow up. you feel so much more confident about your ability to protect yourself in the world when you have this information about what is really true about the value of yourself and the value of your body. Because you can differentiate that from the lies that society is giving you, whether that's coming from the church or whether that's just coming from a consumer-based culture. And I don't believe that either any of those places are intending to not give us the truth, but sometimes they're not giving us the truth.
And that's just the reality of it. Like you said, the society and media is not changing the rhetoric because it's working for what their goal is of selling and making people change in order to be better in bed, be better looking, be this, be that.
Yeah.
And
I think that the church is wanting people to comply, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that compliance is important. I also hear that what you're saying is not so much that in order for sexual shame to be gone that you'd have to not be a part of a church or a part of a religion. It's having the conversation, having your values aligned with, okay, we can teach abstinence. This is a value that we hold in this house, that you don't have sex before you're married. That's an important part of our family and a part of your life and your eternal plan.
Yep.
But you don't have to just ignore it.
Right, absolutely. And you can explain all the reasons why you value that. You don't have to say it's just this way because, but you can say, here's all the reasons that we value this. There are just so many reasons that we value this, as well as why we value it in our faith. But here are some other I'll often talk to people about, here are faith reasons why we value not having sex until you get married. But some practical reasons are things like intercourse in a heterosexual relationship is very organizing, right?
Mm-hmm.
The culture organizes marriages around intercourse, and the church organizes the sexual relationship around intercourse.
Yes.
So if you learn to keep it on the shelf and learn to make love, let's say 300 other ways.
Ooh, 300 other ways.
All before you get married, then I will guarantee you will have a better sex life than everyone else you know.
That sounds like a Cosmopolitan front cover. How do we learn to make love 300 other ways besides hanging from a ceiling fan and doing all sorts of other things I see on Cosmo?
you see every other inch of your body as precious and beautiful and erotic, and they belong to your beloved. Some of the hottest quote-unquote sex that people have is before they get married, when there's so much anticipation and want and desire, and they're not doing certain things. So actually keeping things on the shelf can create anticipation. So if you actually said, okay, we can only deal with our arms and legs, that's it. How much heat can we create? How much can I appreciate your body if that's all I get to touch, all I get to kiss?
Wow.
Right? I mean, really, if we could just widen our definition of sexuality to include good sex, the best sex is connection and pleasure. Mm-hmm. It's not the behaviors we do, because if you can have intercourse and have your head somewhere else, like in your grocery plan, mm-hmm. then you're not having good sex. And everybody can do that. Everyone will nod their head. Can you have really bad intercourse? Yes, you can. But if you make the definition, we will both experience connection and pleasure in the next half an hour, in the next hour, whatever, and you both decide what you want that to look like, then there's easily 300 ways to make love. And inside that 300 ways, there's ways that accommodate just having a baby, someone being sick, being 75, being before you get married, right?
Yeah.
That honor where you are.
Wow.
It honors your faith. It honors so many things. We just have to widen out how we think of what sex is.
Yeah, it sounds like you'd even be able to address, say you're working through vaginismus or erectile dysfunction or premature ejaculation. It doesn't end because genitals are not working the way that you'd like them to, or that are no longer able to perform penile to vaginal intercourse. But you've got 300 other ways to connect and show love and be vulnerable with each other.
Exactly. One of the guidelines in the Vow of Onah says that the purpose of all sexual touch is to reinforce the loving bond over the lifespan. The idea that the elderly were not sexual or are not sexual is a totally foreign concept in the Torah. And so it is this idea that people who are 90 are not sexual is completely foreign to the Hebrew people. So it is not thought of that you have to have a working penis. That's not necessary. Because the goal is connection and pleasure. The goal is bonding. It's connection and pleasure. It's not how does your penis perform, or is your vagina lubricating, or are you able to have an orgasm in this much time? That's not it. It's are you experiencing connection and pleasure together? Are you using your sexuality to do what God gave it to you for?
Completely.
To nourish yourself. Yeah.
So important. So important.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Tina, for being on the show. This has been very enlightening.
Oh, you're so welcome. It's been super fun.
This has been another episode of the Birds and Bees podcast. Thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions about the show, comments, or questions you would like addressed in another episode, please give us a call at 385-449-1818. Leave your voicemail and your question, or you can also email us at birdsandbeespodcast@gmail.com or visit us online at birdsandbeespodcast.com.